It's time for Talkin Tauntauns, your Star Wars source at AIPTcomics.com.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Talkin Tauntauns. I am Jim Lehane, and with me, as always, is Nicole Herview.
Hello there.
Hello, Nicole. And with us is, I guess, an old friend of mine by this point. We've known each other for many years, and a good friend to the sciences in general. It's my friend and maybe yours if you're listening and you know him, Gabriel Santos.
Hello.
How are you doing, Gabe?
Good. You know, just waiting out a hurricane in California.
As one does.
Yeah. NBD.
So, I know Gabe as a fellow paleontologist, but that is not the reason we have him on the show today. He has spearheaded. Are you the primary person that helped put this together, or
Co-founder
of a science communication initiative called Cosplay for Science? And
Yeah.
I think to get started, I just kind of like give us a general overview of what this is.
For sure, yeah. So Cosplay for Science is, like you said, science communication, science education initiative that originally was started by myself, Brittany Stoneberg, Michelle Barboza Ramirez, and Isaac Magallanes. We're four paleontologists at the time, and we are all super nerdy. We all like Star Wars a lot, especially like me and Isaac, and other cool fandoms. And we always loved, like, on our own, just like connecting the science and our science to pop culture and nerddom kind of fun fandom things. And what happened is, we always did it kind of on our own. I did it a few times at museum. I talked about like Pokemon, science of Pokemon, and things like that. But one day, Brittany was all like, "Hey, we're going to a comic book convention, a small one here in LA." And she's like, "You guys should go too." And I was like, "Oh, hell yeah. That sounds like right up my alley. Free Comic-Con admission. I'm down." But then I was like, well, if we're going to go and we're going to bring fossils for our museum, we're going to dress up. We're going to cosplay. We're not just going to go to a Comic-Con and not cosplay. So we all cosplayed as characters from Jurassic Park. And, we'd done like pop culture events before, small ones and other kinds of public events. And we brought fossils, and it was just a very basic pop-up museum, right? The fossils were there. And we would engage with guests, and a lot of folks would be like, "Oh, that's cool." But then we noticed when we were at the Comic-Con, when we were there in cosplay and talked, like putting like the Jurassic Park stuff in the forefront, folks were so much more interested to come and talk to us. We noticed a significant like increase in interest and the amount of time people stayed at the booth with us. And so we kind of like noticed that people wanted to talk to us more when they thought of us as cosplayers first. And then once they found out we were paleontologists, they're like, "Oh my God, you're a real paleontologist? I have 1,000 questions." And so it kind of like sparked this thing in us where we're all like, what if we did this more? And so that's what started Cosplay for Science. And since that first con, we've really started to work and build this kind of network community, but also our own kind of style of science communication and science education, where we develop these immersive storytelling based pop-up museums where they're all inspired by different fandoms and pop culture, to connect and bridge the science that's inherent in our favorite stories in pop culture. And we are the ones who bridge that connection and share it with folks to get them to think about science in their everyday lives and interests, but also practice critical thinking skills when they're enjoying their favorite, movies and comic books and stuff that we hope they can then take to the real world. So that's kind of how Cosplay for Science got started.
That's
so cool. And what a good idea. Like it's just brilliant.
Thank you.
So I know, so the Star Wars Ologies podcast, friends of our show, Melissa Miller and James Floyd, we've had them on a few times, and I've done panels with them. I was not able to do Comic-Con because that's a lot of money to fly out there from New York. And I said, well, I know someone who I think would be perfect for you guys, who lives out in California, and so I gave them your name, and now I'm seeing like Cosplayer for Science with Star Warsologies like teaming up on like multiple initiatives at different cons and different panels and stuff. So that's absolutely fantastic. I love that you guys are doing that.
Yeah, it's been so fun, and like you connecting us in that first place was just like so serendipitous because like we were looking for the next step, and you know, James and Melissa were like, how can we be involved more with like the real science stuff side of things? And it was just all worked out, along with like working with the If Then initiative down in San Diego. When we were looking for Comic-Con, we all wanted to do the same thing, right? We all love talking about pop culture and, you know, the science that's woven into those pop culture stories. And when we all met, we're like, we're going to do this, right? And so like all of a sudden our network just exploded, and now we're so excited to be bringing more content to like San Diego Comic-Con, or just, you know, California, and hopefully the rest of the United States and beyond in general.
Yeah, I feel like that would go over so well at New York Comic Con. Like that, it'd be great. Like
That's a dream.
yeah, come hang out. Yeah, it's interesting because obviously the tie between Jurassic Park and paleontology is just so that's
Obvious. It's
I don't want to say obvious, but like it's very it's a logical step, right? So what are some of the other like connections you've made from pop culture to, you know, a branch of science? Like what maybe some of the less obvious connections you've made, or just in general, like some of the most interesting for you guys?
Yeah, like one of the like more that are a little bit more obvious, like we've done the science of Pokemon, right? We talked about how a lot of real life animals inspired Pokemon, right? But then we went a little deeper. We talked about how Pokemon actually
I like how you're like, this is kind of obvious. And as someone who knows like almost nothing about Pokemon, this does not seem obvious to me whatsoever.
oh, okay. Well, I think I'm just jaded as a working at Natural History Museum, right? So yeah, like Pokemon, a lot of Pokemon are inspired by real world animals. So you think of things like, you know, I mean, they're a little bit more, you know, derived, as we would say in paleontology, like Charmander, Charizard. Yes, they look like dragons, but they obviously come from like reptilian inspirations, right? You've got things like Pikachu, which is inspired by the mouse, and a pika, and then you've got really cool like fossil Pokemon. You've got like Rampardos, which is inspired by Pachycephalosaurs and things like that. And if you go beyond just the pure inspirations for these Pokemon, we talk a lot about how Pokemon has a lot of lessons for naturalists, right? And so kind of in a way, Pokemon trains and inspires future naturalists by going out there and having to catch them all in the world. You're sort of learning the basis of data collection, right? Because you're completing your Pokedex, learning about nature. And so we did a really cool panel with a bunch of scientists and naturalists at LA Comic-Con, where we talked about how Pokemon inspired them as scientists and naturalists and where those lessons came from in the game. So that was really fun for us. One that was a little bit more like further from like the direct connection was the day before the series finale of Game of Thrones. We did a Game of Thrones pop-up museum where we talked about the inspirations behind the major houses, right? So of course, where dragons came from, we talked about lions and dire wolves and things like that. That one was really great because if we had debuted it the day after, no one would have given a crap about that.
No.
So
talk about a show that burned its fan base.
Oh my God. I'm just like, man, the day when we had set up, I was so happy about it. And then we watched the finale. I looked at everybody like, oh damn, I'm so glad that we did that yesterday. Because I would have changed my if we watch that, I'm like, we're changing the pop-up museum today. We're not putting this back up.
Yeah.
I think
good timing. Well done.
Oh yeah, thank you. I think our most popular pop-up museum we've done, which is I think I wouldn't call it obvious either, but like it's just so inherent, the science inspiration in that is our Star Wars inspired Galactic Archive. And so what that is it's a pop-up science museum where we talk about natural history, but from the perspective of Star Wars. So I built a narrative around this pop-up museum, and the way it works is it's called the Galactic Archive. It was a pre-Clone Wars project where a team of Jedi and Republic scientists went out to the galaxy to archive life in different planets, right? And so it's just to create this grand archive. Post Clone Wars and post Empire, what had happened was, in post Purge, the Jedi just kind of like, look, we survived somehow, and we're not really Jedi anymore. What they do now is they follow the tenets of the living force, kind of like what Qui-Gon did, and their job, they feel their duty now is to protect wildlife and natural spaces and all these really unique organisms throughout the galaxy, from the Empire, right? So the idea is they fly into like war-torn planets and other places that have been ravaged by the Empire to protect wild spaces and archive creatures that are at risk of disappearing, and also just observe and record the way that the living force has affected evolution and things like that in the galaxy. And so at the pop-up museum, we have real life specimens that are stand-ins, right? So I've got like an ankylosaur skull that's like a dewback skull, and we've got fox skulls that are the what are the crystal foxes again from Crate, the Vulpexes.
Oh yeah.
And then we've got I've got tons of creatures. I've got like all these weird Devonian fishes that are like from the trenches of Naboo, and we've got a hadrosaur skull that is the a Kadu from Naboo as well. So it's just really fun making these connections where on like a meta level it shows how the real world inspired this science fantasy world, right, of Star Wars.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we as the characters that we create. So I'm dressed up as a Jedi when I'm at the pop-up museum, and I'm former Jedi Master Gabral Zonto. Yes, I
Clever.
Love that. No, it's great. That's what it takes.
That I was very proud of my level of nerdiness for that one. But when I'm that character, we're in the world, and I'm like, when people walk up, I'm like, greetings, younglings, welcome to the Grand Galactic Archive. Normally I have a very bad British accent when I do it too, and so they walk up and I explain like, here we've got creatures cataloged from throughout the galaxy, and allow me to explain and show you the ways of the living force. And we talk about the different planets that we've explored and the animals that we've cataloged from there. And then eventually we will break the immersion, after we've got their attention, and people are like, whoa, that's so cool. I'm like, yeah, isn't it? And then actually in the real world, I'm a paleontologist. I'd love to talk to you more, or if you have any questions about like how evolution works or how it could have worked on, like Naboo or Hoth, right? Like I've got a ram skull that's a tauntaun from Hoth.
Yes,
and I love to talk about
that.
That's one of my favorite ones, because I love talking about cold adaptations, right, on Hoth. And so I love talking about the way that a lot of bighorn sheep have adapted to these cold, arid environments on top of mountains, right? And I love sharing how the artists for Star Wars Episode 5 took those real life adaptations that they saw on other animals and made tauntauns actually a very believable cold weather animal, right? I love talking about how Tara Whitlatch created the designs and showing how evolution could work in the Star Wars world.
That is fascinating that they actually like took those steps to be like, okay, if we had this kind of a creature in this environment, what happens? Like following what we actually know. Because as creatives, we do have to pull from real life, or else it doesn't feel real. But we just see the end result as an audience, right? Like we just see a tauntaun and we go, yep, sure. But if they didn't go through those steps, it wouldn't feel authentic.
Like putting a giant lizard on Hoth, like a dewback, you'd go, that doesn't
Something's
quite make
wrong.
sense.
Yeah.
Well, like my thing as a science communicator is that we are all inherently scientists, right? We observe the world and we take data and we make understandings and develop our perceptions. We know what works because we observe it every day. So we have this natural understanding of the way the world works. And when we watch movies or sci-fi and things like that, and we see something that doesn't work with our understanding of the world, we automatically question it. We may not, for some of us who are not as versed in, science, like the scientific concepts, we may not understand why we're questioning it, but that's something that I love to just draw on naturally as an educator when we look at the perceptions of the world, because again, we inherently know, like you said, if we put a lizard on Tauntaun, our basic understanding of how reptiles work, what we're taught, is like, wait, how does that really work? But then I can come in and be like, well, okay, hold on. You may understand lizards and stuff are endothermic or ectothermic, right? Like they need exterior heat. But there are dinosaurs that evolved and adapted to cold environments in Antarctica and where Antarctica is now today, not where it is today, but like ancient Antarctica that was a little bit further north. Dinosaurs that adapted and evolved in the very far northern regions of Canada, or what is Canada today. So it's just these cool ways that you can pull at threads and make new connections for people, and using pop culture, because that's the relatability there. We can make these far off concepts more relatable to folks who, either may not have the hardcore interest to go into the science, or may have never had the opportunity to engage in science, right? But they know the pop culture. One of my favorite science communicators is Dr. Diana Lee, and she said, we all have the lexicon of science because of pop culture and stories and things like that. They just don't have the connections. And that's what we want to do. We want to be like the avatars of like pop culture and science.
I love that.
I like how you're like the Canada of today. Like dinosaurs had their own Canada, and it doesn't necessarily match up with the Canada of today, eh?
Well, when they talk about it, right? It's like you got to make sure that those dinosaurs, you got to give respect to those dinosaurs, don't you know?
Don't you know the maple dinosaurs?
Oh yeah.
Those ones.
They're the flavorful ones.
Yeah. They're, if you liked Land Before Time, they're those like really rich tree stars. You know what I mean? Those are like the dessert tree stars.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Littlefoot and them, they were getting like so hyper when they visited like ancient dinosaur Canada. It's great.
Yeah, just sugar high. How lovely. That's the real Great Valley. I don't know what that place was, but mine is a maple paradise. Ridiculous. I found it very interesting what you just said about like there's that dissonance, right? And the disconnect if like we like see something that's like that's not right. Is there an example of something that you picked up on watching something when you were like, because we all have those moments where like the physics doesn't work or like whatever it is, but is there something like specifically that like drives you nuts that was like, I can't unsee this? Like,
drives me nuts in the world of Star Wars. I think sometimes this is just me being super nitpicky, but like,
sure, do it.
Sometimes when they do hybrids of different alien races, and I know they try to explain that in the world of Star Wars by saying like a lot of life is seeded, and so we have like a genetic origin to each other. But it's just like, even in Rebels when Hera and Kanan had a hybrid human Twi'lek son, like I can suspend disbelief as a Star Wars fan and just a sci-fi fan in general and be like, all right, but in the back of my mind, my brain's like, how does the genetics work like that? They don't even have the same organs and all that. Like, what? And then are their gestation periods are the same and blah, blah, blah. And so when I see hybrids like that, like that's the thing that will just like, I wouldn't say irk me, but like,
it's just like the whole, biology, yeah.
Are they the same? Because in my head, I had assumed, or no, I thought I learned that in original Legends canon, like Twi'leks were more reptilian of their origin base versus what our humans are. I might be misunderstanding that, but regardless, like Twi'leks have a very different like nervous system and a very different like organ system, I think, than baseline humans. And so things like that is what like really would irk me, I guess. And I don't want to be negative about it too, because like one of the main tenets of Cosplay for Science is we want to be as positive as possible, right? Like when there's folks who learn something, even if it's misinformation or a wrong perspective of science from pop culture, they carry that with them, and then when they are corrected sometimes they feel bad, and then that makes them want to draw back from learning more about science, right? And unfortunately, there are some scientists and science communicators out there who are, in my opinion, just a little too blunt when they say things. They're like, they'll go on Twitter and be like, this was scientifically accurate, and I think you should feel bad for believing that kind of stuff, right? And I see, and I've spoken with people who are just like, yeah, I just don't think science is really for me. I used to think this, and then I found out it's not this way. And so I just don't think science was for me. And with Cosplay for Science, we don't want people feeling bad about learning something that wasn't their fault because they just didn't have the science educator, the right educator, or the right connection there. And so we never tell people that they're wrong unless it's like a matter of like like ethics that they're wrong. Then we'll still be gently, but we'll be like, that's wrong. But for the most part, we try to be very kind and be like, hey, that's great. That's what you learned in the show, in the movie. And that's how it works in their universe. Let me explain how things works in our universe. And you can have both. It's okay to know and like both. But when someone's just trying to be contrarian or like just explicit, like very wrong about some science and about like something ethically wrong, then like I said, we'll be like, well, okay, hold on, like that is not considered ethical or scientifically accurate in the least. So let me show and share what we know. You can take it or leave it if you want.
That's it. Try not to be the well actually guy.
Yeah, we're like the and teachers, right? Like and so it's for me, I've had really good experiences like that. And with Cosplay for Science, we're also a research initiative. We are studying, thanks to our PI, Dr. Lisa Lundgren, we study kind of how pop culture affects the perceptions of people and science and scientists based off of pop culture. And we also are studying how interactions with cosplaying scientists how that works, right? With getting people to engage in science. So we're developing like best practices and things like that. So there's a lot of stuff that we're doing like on the back end of things to not just be like, hey, we're going to Comic-Con for free and talk about science, which is a great perk, I will admit. But we're also really trying to do something and learn how we can be better, not just for ourselves, but encourage other folks to think outside the box. We don't need like everyone to do Cosplay for Science. Like if that's not your thing, that's fine. But there are ways to think outside the box and be relatable to people and have them engage in science that are relatable,
Yeah.
What's your favorite kind of setup that you like to do?
Oh, it's definitely the Galactic Archive. Like I get to call it work, right? I get paid to go to Comic-Con, dress up as a Jedi, and talk about some of my favorite Star Wars planets and animals. And I do that all day. Like I rarely get tired like from a full day of Comic-Con anymore, just because I'm so excited. I feel it for sure when I get home. Like I get back and I pull my knee-high boots off. I'm like, oh my God, I feel disgusting. But when I'm in the moment at the con, engaging with people about Star Wars, for me, that's so special because Star Wars is actually one of the movies that inspired me to be a scientist in a way. Like as a kid, I remember watching like Star Wars Episode 5, right? My parents actually showed me them out of order on accident. So I watched Star Wars Episode 5 and I remember like seeing Hoth and the Tauntauns, and I loved animals and biology as a very young kid. And I already remember like just being fascinated and asking like, how do they live there and things like that. And then as I went on and reading more about Star Wars, a lot of the science fiction elements really inspired my love of asking questions and having that scientific mindset. And I even wrote about Star Wars for my college admittance essay to UC Irvine and how it inspired my love of science. And so I owe a lot in a very weird way to Star Wars for being the kind of scientist and educator that I am. And so getting to do that at a Comic-Con, which when I went as like a young teenager and as a young adult, was like, I would love to work here one day. And, because I knew how much science there was. And the fact that I'm doing it now as a professional in a Jedi cosplay, there's just something so like, I can't explain what the feeling is totally, but it's just like
Like
it's
surreal.
just so yeah, it's surreal. It's just like a dream come true kind of thing where like I'm actually a Jedi master teaching these younglings about the living force, and it's just it it just feels so good and it makes me so happy. And when I get to see people smile when I help them make a new connection to the world, it's the best feeling to me as an educator. Like there are days where like I have this great interaction and I think about it going home and I get a little teary-eyed because it's what I love doing and it makes me feel happy when I get to do stuff like that.
That's amazing and so full circle and just like poetic and lovely. And I love that for you. That's so great.
It just sounds fun. Like
Yeah, it does
I
sound
love
fun.
doing that sort of stuff. Like you have a very similar view as I do on the pop culture. Like yes, the pop culture, a lot of the stuff out there is just wrong. It's just inaccurate, but it doesn't mean that we can't use it for something good.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
a volcano erupting in the middle of Los Angeles. Does that make any sense? No. But can it make sense? Maybe. Like if we
Mm,
change some things, like perhaps Star Wars. I love the failsafe of Star Wars. It's a galaxy far, far away.
mm.
It could be anything. It doesn't
I,
need to make sense.
Yeah. And even then, it's like, it doesn't have to make an immediate connection, right? It's just the start. It's the very start of like this string that we can pull on and show them where the real hardcore scientific concepts are, right? Like,
Hmm. Hmm.
in Star Wars, like, I'm not a astrophysicist. I don't know like the engineering stuff, but like some of my friends at JPL, they know that stuff. And we can talk about like, okay, well, hyperdrive we can explain how it works theoretically if we look at all
Mm.
these different things and work around what we know, but it's also like let's talk about like how our engines actually work today and how we get into space and what it will look like in maybe a few years, right? And so it's those kind of connections that can inspire folks to go down this path that they never could have thought of. Like, to go off Star Wars for just a second, like one of my favorite stories that we did with an audience member was we were doing a panel at LA Comic Con. And I like to ask people when we do specific cosplay for science panels is like, okay, so talk to your neighbor and think about like science in a favorite show that you love, right? And how that might have inspired science for you, right? And so I always, the audience talks for a few minutes and I ask a few people to give their answer. And we have great ones. But then at the end of this panel, I remember someone came up to me. It was like this young teenager, was like, I don't like science. I don't think I'm good at science. But I was talking with my partner and he was like, we talked a little bit about like some anime, and then you said Full Metal Alchemist is like science. And he's like, I hate chemistry. I'm not good at chemistry, but I think I know chemistry because of Full Metal Alchemist. I was like, okay, I want you to tell me the full alchemical formula for a human being. I know you know it. And he was like, he went off and said, he's like, it's this percent carbon, this percent nitrogen, and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, you literally listed elements and percentages. You know chemistry in your own
Mm.
way because of Film Alchemist. And he smiled so big. And he was like, because he realized he doesn't hate science. He just doesn't like the way it was explained to him. And in that moment,
Mm.
he was just like, thank you. And I was like, you're so welcome. And then I turned around and cried. But
Oh,
it was just, that's one of my favorite stories. And even if I only reached that one guy or like two or three people at a con, that's two more people who are on the side of science and critical thinking.
how fantastic. Like, yeah, just how rewarding. And yeah, doing a great job. That's amazing. Um,
I, I sound like an anime character giving speeches sometimes, so you're welcome to
no,
pull me
no,
back a little bit.
no, I love it. Like there is nothing like hearing someone talk about something they're both good at and passionate about. And yeah, I think that's fantastic. I am gonna ask you a very silly question after a beautiful, like heartwarming, touching story about how you actually have an impact on people's lives and their views to science, which is great. Um, is there a Star Wars creature that you want to put in the archive, but like there might not be a direct like, okay, the skull actually looks like this creature, or like, is there anything like that where you haven't been able to make that connection yet, but like maybe you've got an idea but you haven't done it yet, or anything like that?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, there's two of them, right? This
Okay.
is just because, so my original training is a marine mammal paleontologist, right?
Mhm.
So in the first episode of The Mandalorian, they had that giant walrus thing.
Oh,
I
yes.
can't remember the name right now. I don't have a walrus skull anywhere, but also
Mhm.
that animal is huge.
Huge.
And so I want to have that animal just because I love marine mammals. I helped describe um, a new species of walrus here in California. And so I have a very special connection to walruses. And so I
Amazing.
really want that. When I saw that on that episode, I was like, walrus, walrus, I'm ready. But I just couldn't figure out how to do it. And the one that truly that I want to just incorporate, because I think the connections to it are so cool, are purgils, right? Like
Yeah.
one, there's like the hyperspace element. They just look so cool. They feed on like Tibanna gas. They go beyond our understanding of life, even in the Star Wars galaxy. They just go beyond what we already understand of most planet-based species, because they are a space-based species, like Minox and stuff, which are silicon-based life forms.
We don't get many space-based species. I can think of 4 off the top of my head. Actually, it was 3, and then you reminded me Minox. The slug,
That's unique.
the Exogorth, and the thing in Solo, the Zuma Varamoth or something.
Oh,
I
right.
mean,
The one in the mall, right?
Yeah, James Floyd. Speaking of random things, James Floyd would know what that is.
yeah.
Yeah, like, and I think that the thing I like most about the Purrgil is they're not attached to something else, right? So the space slug, it has to be attached to some sort of celestial object, right? Because that's the way it lives. Minox, they are parasitic. They look for things and attach to them. They can feed, and even that maw creature is attached to that like weird space storm, right? The Purrgil are not. They are free to roam the galaxy because they have hyperspace or organics somehow. So they are inherently unique in their freedom, and that changes everything about what we can understand of evolution, right? When they're not attached to an environment. Their environment literally is infinite in a weird way, right? And also, there's so like again, there's just so many questions. Like we know that hyperdrive routes and lanes in Star Wars are very, very dangerous to explore, right? The Purrgil don't have these hypercomputer things to calculate their hyperspace jumps. They just know where to go. Are they like elephants? Do they have that ancient memory of the hyperspace lanes, like elephants remembering their migration routes to water? They feed on Tibanna gas, or they use Tibanna gas for their hyperspace jumps. Well, what's the internal mechanism for that? And there's just so many things. They look so amazing because one, they look so alien, but they also in a weird way fit the galaxy, and they look like they work. And I want to know what I just want to have. I want to have like a juvenile Purrgil behind our pop-up museum, and just be like, all right, you sit down. I'm going to go on a 30-minute rant about how cool the Purrgil are, and we are going to learn like 1,000 different scientific concepts in this 30 minutes, and it's going to be fun and great.
I would pay for that. I'd just sit and be like, okay, go ahead. Let's do it. And with the Purrgil, like, forgive me, I am clearly not a scientist. Like, y'all are the scientific minds. I am the one who's like, nope. Like I did okay in school, but I didn't retain any of it. Not because I didn't think it was interesting. It's just the opposite side of my brain, right? But I find it fascinating, like talking about these things. So forgive me if I'm like asking rudimentary questions or anything like that.
There's no such thing as a dumb question.
Sure. Just, yeah. I was going to say something, but I'm like, we're not putting ourselves down today.
Yes.
Yeah. To me, the Purgle, like they align in my brain with a whale. Is
Mhm.
that kind of, does that track? Does it, in your mind, does it go a different way? Kind of like where, yeah, just in my brain, it's a whale, but that might not be, I don't want to say correct because I don't think there's like a right answer, but like, yeah.
But that's where my closest like equivalent, I guess, would come in our world, or like
Mm,
the inspiration, because we already think of space, right, as like kind of like this vast kind of ocean type thing, right? Like,
right.
so they're all fleets, they all use like navy terms and things like that. And so, and then like I think space-time works in waves anyway. So yeah, I think that the Purgle as like a space whale is a great, like, what's the word, like connection to
Analogy.
that analogy, right? Yeah, so like
Hmm.
I think Purgle as whales is a great analogy. They travel in pods, right? They
Hmm.
sing to each other in a way too, as we saw in Rebels. They're very empathetic because like
Mm.
they found that way to like connect to Ezra, which, oh, I was so jealous of Ezra in that episode. And yeah, they travel vast distances in a weightless environment. And I think they have that very whale-like silhouette, right? Of
Hmm.
like that kind of big head, that kind of elongated body. And the biggest difference is like make it a whale, but give it tentacles. And it just
Hmm.
works and it fits. And I love the Purgle. It was one of, after Ahsoka, the Purgle is probably one of my favorite additions from Filoni.
Oh yeah.
The whales, the whale size also makes sense because the reason whales are so big on Earth is because they live in a basically almost a size limitless environment. You don't have gravity really affecting like land animals. Gravity is a huge influence when you're in the water. The buoyancy you can really get almost as big as like possible as long as you have enough
Mm.
food. Space, same thing. You do not have the size limitations of gravity, so you can get as big as you want as long as you have the food to sustain it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's another thing. Is like I don't know what the Purgle are actually eating. And I want to know more. Because they have a mouth, right? And they
Right.
have, I think they had teeth, if I recall correctly.
I think they
And so,
did.
right? Like when they're feeding
Yeah.
the Savannah gas, they had like teeth. So I'm
Mhm.
just like, okay, so what are they eating? Again, I could
What's
go
that
on and on
for?
about the Purgle just because like if 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 I were magically transported to the Star Wars galaxy, like that's what I would dedicate my time to, even if I was a
Mm.
Jedi, which is to be studying the Purgle more. And like I think that I think like ancients discovered hyperspace by observing the Purgle, but I don't think anyone's done anything else beyond that after like the thousands and thousands of years of hyperspace travel. The Purgle are unknown because obviously like when they discovered them, the Rebel crew was like, I don't really know what that is. And then
Mm.
I would just love that sailing the galaxy, just following these whales, studying them. It's like what I would
Mhm.
love to do here in the real world, you know?
Yeah.
So when you were talking about the Purgles not knowing how do they know hyperspace? I'm thinking evolutionarily. You had that first few Purgles who are able to jump hyperspace but don't know where they're going. And so you have
Mm.
stories of major climactic disasters where Purgles slammed into continents, wiping out entire life planets because they just hyperspaced right into a planet.
The Great Cataclysm actually was just a Purgle. Like, oops,
The
sorry.
dinosaurs went extinct
No.
because of Purgle. It wasn't an
The
asteroid, it was a Purgle.
It was a
Tats-
Purgle.
Tatooine got glassed. It wasn't an ancient spacefaring species. It was a pod of Purgle that just blasted into Tatooine.
Jeez. I love this. This is now what I believe. This is a headcanon that I adopt. Thank you very much, my
I'm at, I,
friends.
I'm adopting this now too. All the major
Yeah.
disasters are
Are,
It's
Purgle.
are
just Purgle.
are Purgles that don't know how to hyperspace track.
Yeah. My God. The no. I was gonna say High Republic stuff, but don't worry about it. It doesn't work. Um,
Um, I need to get on that. I'm so behind. But anyway,
yeah. Yeah, I kind of dropped off after the first wave and I feel bad about it. I'll get back on that
I
horse. It'll be fine.
I enjoyed it, and I love like the design because I'm a little extra, and I love that
Mm.
everyone in the High Republic is like, let's put a little gold on everything.
Yeah, let's just add a little spice. Like, why not?
Yeah,
Yeah, I love it too.
I've said like the High Republic with the way they did the waves, you could skip the second wave.
That's probably what I'm gonna do.
Or the phases. The first phase, it takes place like time period. The second phase is 150 years before it, and then
Yeah.
the third phase takes place immediately after the first phase. So it's like that second phase is like interesting, but not imperative.
Oh, is that what happened? Is that why I was so confused?
I don't know if that's why you were so
Probably.
confused, but it is a way to confuse people.
Okay. Well,
It
I haven't
seems
been picking them up in order. I've just been picking up things whenever I see it, and I was like, wait.
Oh, that's
what?
not a good plan.
Yeah, they're very deliberate with how they map those books out.
Oh.
And yeah, so that's why to me going back 150 years was a choice. Maybe not one I would have made, but after being so deliberate with the order of the books and like how they came out and how you should, in quotes, read them. Yeah, it's interesting. It was an interesting one, but I digress. Although, what the hell is the name of that freaking thing that was on the ship that killed everybody?
Oh.
That scared the living hell out of me. And the Drengir. I'd love to talk about the Drengir for a long time, but like to me, that freaking thing, the like smoke monster son of a gun.
The leveler?
I was the level. Thank you. Like that thing was just so unlike anything I think we could wrap our heads around, and I think that might be why it was so terrifying. But I don't know if I'm just like pulling stuff out of my butt right now. You know,
I love it when they have things like that they just pull out of nowhere in Star Wars that that are like beyond the understanding, because Star Wars to me is like, again, like space fantasy, and when they pull something from like the beyond kind of stuff, and it's just like shows them that even though this civilization is tens of thousands, or maybe even hundreds of thousands of years old, right? The galactic core and all that is like, there's still so much about the galaxy that they don't understand. And for me, I love that, because as a scientist, you know, like people are like, oh, we know so much about the world and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, we know so little about it still. And things like that in Star Wars, another great kind of like pull for that kind of stuff. And like, you know, I love when the unknown comes into play, because the unknown, one of my favorite quotes is, the unknown is the most powerful source of inspiration. And so as scientists, that's where all of our questions and hypotheses come from. And so when you can do that in Star Wars, which, you know, is like, again, they apparently know so much, but then every now and then they throw you in a loophole, or not loophole, they throw you for like a loop, and then you're like, I don't know. People, all the like scientists in the Jedi Academy are like, it's the Force.
Shrug.
Yeah,
That's what I love.
The Force.
Yeah, it's the Force did it. It's the will of the Force. So is that just your way of going, I don't know?
Yeah, think so.
That's why I love our
so.
planet. It's like we know more about the moon than we know about the floor of the oceans.
I was gonna say the ocean. Yeah, it's terrifying.
And
so
as a
that's
marine mammal paleontologist, the ocean is terrifying and beautiful at the same time. But
Definitely.
I don't think I could ever go swimming in like the deep ocean where I can't see more than like 20 feet around me. Because no, thank you.
Yeah, it's like I'll if I do that, I'll be the one who finds the freaking like the Kraken. Like it'll be me. I find Cthulhu, and we all find out that that's real, and it's my fault. Like that's my luck. You know what I mean? Like that would be.
Well, it's like everything comes out of the oceans. What was that movie? Pacific Rim. Like everything, they all came out of the like deep oceans, and
I love Pacific Rim so much. I could go on. That's another pop-up museum I want to do so bad, because I love Gundam, I love kaiju, and there's so many cool science connections in there, between like talking about engineering and things like that, and then talking about like, you know, the upper size limit of creatures and how physics works on evolution and stuff like that. Like I just want to have a Jaeger pilot cosplay.
Yeah, that'd be so cool. That'd be so dope. Yeah, I kind of wonder how kaiju would like work. Like, could Godzilla be like that big? Like, or is that real? Like, could we have a Kong? Like, you know what I mean? Because really, it's just a big monkey. But does that work? Like, I don't know.
Ape.
You know,
He doesn't like being called a monkey.
right? Yes. See, I don't know what I'm.
Well,
Thank you, Jim.
even in like Star Wars, they like, they push the limit of what our known physics are, right? Of like the maximum size limit of stuff. Like, and James, because like you did dinosaur stuff, right?
Me?
Oh, sorry, Jim, you did dinosaur stuff, right?
For in my sciences or
Yeah. Didn't you do some
yes.
dinosaur stuff? Okay, right. So like even dinosaurs, like all the massive ones, like the adaptations they have are just to support their massive weight on land. I mean, there's like an upper limit of how much weight they
Yeah,
can support on land, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Like even like as you go bigger and bigger, it kind of like levels off where it's like we found another giant animal that's like maybe just a tiny bit hair fraction bigger than the last giant animal. Like we're not going to find anything like, oh my God, this is like 3 times the size of the largest animal we've ever known.
Right.
Yeah, it's not a Zillow beast or anything like that.
Unfortunately not.
I don't want a Zillow beast in the fossil record.
It'll be
That
lightsaber
seems
proof.
precarious.
And we don't have lightsabers, so what's the point?
Laser torch.
If that lightsabers are the one thing that I want to be made real, like in the immediate, like I could care less about hyperspace travel, honestly. Unless I have a lightsaber, I want a lightsaber before I die. That's like the biggest thing that I would want from Star Wars to like become real as like one as a nerd and a scientist, just because like, I mean, I walk around with like my lightsaber hilt at Comic-Con and I feel the most badass I've ever felt in my whole life. And so just having a real one would just be the greatest thing ever.
I agree.
One of the questions where I think on one of the panels from Celebration that I was on, this question is like, what would you want? And it's hard because like regardless, like being a scientist, you can't travel to all those planets in our universe because of time and distance. And so that's what like hyperspace just makes sense because that kind of it's literally the Deus Machina of taking time and distance out of the equation. And you can go anywhere you want in the galaxy at once.
Yeah, it is a get out of jail free card for all like limitations in terms of time and distance. Like it's pretty great.
Even in the
Narratively,
movies, it doesn't make sense.
Listen, yeah, but it is a nice device, isn't it? I was going to ask about porgs because how could I not ask about porgs? Because everyone knows they're puffins, right? Like they're there because they're puff. But to me, I'm like, I don't see puffin. I see blob. But like maybe there's some other, like I also see like duck, like platypus. You know what I mean? Like I could see that, like, I don't know. I just see blob of thing. But do you see anything when you see the porgs? Do you like, is there anything that you're like, that's actually really interesting that they did it that way or like whatever?
So this is when I was a child, I had a book about puffins. And so I love puffins. And so when I saw the porgs, I was like, that looks like a puffin. And then I read the back and I was like, oh, it's
really?
because they
Okay.
are puffins. But beyond just that silhouette that they have, that's very puffiny to me. Like the porgs, that's another creature that I was like, I'm so fascinated by what their evolutionary history is because they have wings, but they look mammalian in a weird way, even though they've got like
the face is
Yeah.
they have like a muzzle face. And so I don't know if they're reptile mammals like some other creatures are explained in the galaxy. They're like a amalgam. I can't say that word.
An amalgamation?
Yeah, they're like an amalgamation of like a bunch of animals put together just to make them look alien. And so that's one of the creatures where the natural history is not as inherent to me, at least. I think maybe a bird specialists might be able to see
Sure.
something more. But for me, like, I wasn't immediately able to see like what the natural history and the evolutionary pathway was. Like compared to when I see something like a tauntaun, I was able to just be like, oh, I totally understand why that animal is there, right? A wampa, I totally understand why a wampa is the way it is. And I think if I were to get into more of like the back end of things, like sometimes I will say that I think less thought is put into some creature design, not to like put down other creature designers. I just think some creature designers take more time to make something more believable. They put the backstory into why every single feature on a creature, an organism, is there, right? Because in the real world, for the most part, every single part of our body and things like that, the adaptation came from somewhere. It's not just out of thin air, right? And when we do creature design for a movie, we can do that. We can be like, I'm gonna put this on here just because it's fun. And so I think sometimes they just don't put as much effort into that backstory. And I think the porg might have been one of those creatures where they just didn't give it like a great backstory. Like the weird, I can't remember their name, like the weird milk seal thing that
Yeah.
Luke got the milk from, right?
The siren,
That
thalassiren,
yeah, the
or
siren.
something.
Thalassiren, which is a great name, honestly, because it's like ocean siren thingy. But
Yeah.
that creature actually, I felt like had more of an evolutionary backstory just sitting there in that like couple scenes than the porg did. Because you look at it, it has like that. It has like the fins. I mean, I would say its body shape wasn't that great, but it made a little sense for like an oceanic creature that lives on an island and things like that. Looking at it just from that few seconds, I feel like a little bit more thought went to that one than the porgs did. Yeah, so I will say that I think that there are some creatures out there that just have less thought. Doesn't mean I hate them. I just think that you got to work a little bit more to figure out what their evolutionary history is. And as in the real world too, we're going to see creatures that don't make sense. And unless we take the time to study their evolutionary history and the environment, we're gonna be like, all right, cool. Like birds of paradise. If you walk in and just saw a bird of paradise, like, okay, you're extra for no reason. But then if you think about it, after years of observation, like, oh, they're trying to attract a mate. Makes sense.
So, for people listening, not for you guys, because you both alluded to this, the reason that we had porgs and that the reason that they are so much like puffins, is in the movie, we had puffins in the background because they filmed on Scaling Michael in Ireland. All the puffins were in the background and they couldn't digitally get rid of them. And so they needed an animal that kind of looked like a puffin, but wasn't a puffin to say in the background, so they didn't even have to do anything to the animals in the background and just kind of leave them there and say, oh, those are the porgs. And so that's obviously you guys alluded to it, but I wanted to make sure the audience knew where they came from.
Yeah, you're right. I always assume everybody knows that story, but not everyone is insane like we are. I have to ask you about one more animal, if you'll indulge me. One more creature.
Please.
The bantha.
Oh, yes.
To me, that fuzzy son of a gun in the desert, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But I also, in the back of my mind, am like, maybe that like they need to sweat and they need to like cool themselves off. So they have to have this big, I don't know. What is your take on the bantha?
So I don't have to create one. So Tara Whitlatch in her amazing book, Life in the Star Wars Galaxy, right? It's like got that green like animal skin cover. She does an amazing job of oh good. She does an amazing job of like explaining all the adaptations for bantha. She explains the hair, right? The hair is the protection from like the blasting sand, and it's hot, but they have these huge mouths which they can do heat exchange through, right? That they like kind of just like pant like a big fuzzy puppy dog. And a lot of their silhouettes are like sort of like the elephants, the desert African elephants that go through the desert. So you can see where they pulled from the real world when they first created them for the movie. And then Tara Whitlatch went in and looked again to create that story, that evolutionary story, to make them feel so much more real. And that's so cool to me. Like in the book, Terrell would like gave them like a long sticky tongue thing to like be able to reach and grasp, which was so cool. And then she gave this is one of the things that that I think I wish they carried over from Legends when they did like Book of Boba Fett, was the deep bond that the Tusken Raiders have with their bantha. In the book, every young Tusken Raider gets their own bantha, and they grow up with them, and they form this almost inseparable bond. And when Tusken Raiders find their partner, their bantha will mate too. And so it creates these cool like parallel families. And I wish that they kept that, because I found that this unique one evolutionary aspect, but also this cultural aspect that comes from the Tusken Raiders' connection to the planet. And I thought that would have been so cool if they had kept that. I mean, don't get me wrong, I loved a lot of the story that they added for the Tusken Raiders, but when in terms of the bantha, I feel like the bantha in the current canon haven't been fleshed out. They're more of just like a pack animal, and they're just there kind of thing. And so I wish that they had taken that opportunity. And yeah, like you can see where they pull from, like the elephants and like of course the bighorn sheep, or like ibex and things like that. And it's in a little bit of like muskox. You can see the silhouette there too. And so I love bantha. When I was a kid, I wanted the bantha dolls that they would sell at like the Star Trader, but I never got one actually, because I always bought the lightsaber, so I had to choose one.
Banthas are actually really interesting too, because they are such a wait, that doesn't make any sense. But then like Gabe was saying, our planet doesn't make a lot of sense too when you kind of look at it on the surface, because there are woolly desert animals. Camels a lot of times are super woolly, and the hair on their backs protects them from the sun, and a lot of times they don't have much hair, if any at all, on their bellies, because that's where the heat is released, and so they have the blocking on the top and the undercoat that's not as fluffy. And a recent research I had found also, like camels seem to be derived from Arctic species.
What?
And and so like the oldest known camels that they found are from like the tundra of Russia and stuff, I believe. And so the water preserving isn't a desert adaptation, it's just a dry adaptation that carried them over, that they were able to survive in the deserts. And so, like
interesting.
The bantha.
Wait, how old were those Russian camels? Sorry, Jim. I'm just, now you're pulling in a
That's
thread.
fascinating.
I do not know.
Because from what I understand, camels are originally from North America. They appeared during, or the lineage of camels started in North America during the Eocene. But if they came from Russia first, that would be super, super interesting. Now I got a thread that I got to pull later.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
But I think that's what I mean. It's like, even in our planet, we're still taking time, right, to understand things. And again, for some people, Star Wars organisms are their first foray into natural history thinking, right? And if you can get them to learn how to ask those questions in Star Wars, right, and then they can go out into the real world and nature, they've practiced it, and then they can start asking those questions there. And developing that in Nat Geo terms, like that explorer mindset, I think is so important, because we can, the way that we teach people in school is just about fact memorization and blah, blah. And I can go on and on about that, but there are amazing teachers who do this, but overall, the way that the institution is set up is we don't teach curiosity. We don't teach how to foster your own curiosity and how to pull at threads, essentially. And when folks get out of school, they don't want to do that, because that's how they've been conditioned. And I didn't want to do that either. And I'm a scientist. And so if we can do that in somewhere in a setting that's fun and immersive, again, like the power there of getting folks to do that. And if imagine like a lesson plan where you're like, okay, here's a Bantha, an Eope, and a Ronto. Look at their adaptations that they have there. What are the adaptations to desert life? Where might have they come from? Here's a geologic history of Tatooine. Let's try to bridge these things together and create this evolutionary story of these three animals. Okay, not everyone in the classroom is going to be down for that, but I know at least half is going to be like, let's do this. Yeah, I would.
Yeah, that's super cool.
I know generally the kids are seen as annoying because they will constantly ask why. Not all kids, but a lot of kids, and that's kind of like where you get the scientists from. They want to know why, and that you're like literally pulling on the threads, like why does this happen? Okay, but why does that happen? And eventually you reach the point where there is no answer, and that's where scientists sit.
Yeah,
where there is no answer, but we need that answer. It's just OCD, really.
Gabe, how can people support you guys, if at all? Like, what's the best way that you would ask people to help you guys out?
I think for right now, we're still growing, and I think, excuse me. So we're still growing, and I think we have our website and we have our Instagram, and I think if we just get people to kind of follow us and advocate that, like, hey, we want more science content at our cons, that's a great way to help us. If you really want to help us, we have a Patreon that we started. Jim has been a supporter on that Patreon. So thank you. And yeah, like, we're not in this for money at all. Sure. Like, this is very much, we found ways to support ourselves through it. But if you can help support us to just bring more content, that would be amazing. So yeah, you can follow us online on our Instagram. We have YouTube where we show most of our recorded panels. So if you kind of want to watch those and share that with folks, and the more you watch those too, the more you can tell like LA Comic-Con or Comic-Con to be like, hey, science content is important and wanted at Comic-Con. Like, give them more space to do that thing, right? And so that would help us the most. It's just to kind of say like more science content at our cons is what we want.
Great. And the website is just cosplayforscience.com. So easy
Correct.
To find.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, I think is there anything else? We'll let you go about your day if
no, I think I just want to say thank you so much for having me on your podcast, and I rarely get to nerd out to this level with a lot of people, and so this is very fun for me. Especially when it comes to Star Wars. Like, I have a lot of friends who know Star Wars and will humor me in a way, but like I haven't been able to talk about Purrgil for what was it, like 20 minutes in forever. So that was awesome.
We love that. We'll do a whole episode on Purrgil. Like, it'll be great. Let's do it. God.
so ready.
I'd love that. I love them. They're so interesting.
That may be coming up, so we'll see.
Yeah.
Other than the Cosplay for Science website and the Patreon, is there any other ways that you want people to be able to follow you personally or through the initiative?
Yeah, you can follow me on social. I'm at Paleo Paradox, and I usually post about Cosplay for Science stuff and other, my other projects that I do that are usually pop culture related. So those are the two main ways to like you can get a hold of me. I have TikTok for me, but that's just videos of my dog, my corgi. So you don't need to follow me there.
I love that.
Although I do have a photo, I have a Jedi cosplay for my corgi that he hates wearing, but every now and then I want to like get him in it to just be like my little corgi Padawan.
What a champion.
And with that, you can email us, Talkin Tauntauns at AIPTcomics.com. You can find us on that one social media platform at Talkin Tauntauns. I have
He's talking
joined
about Twitter.
It's not
X.
Twitter.
Yeah, I know, but I refuse Twitter.
I have joined Blue Sky through an invitation by a friend of the show, Jason Fry. He's like, I'm not on this website. Find me on Blue Sky. So I'm over there. I'm still. It seems like a large percentage of the Star Wars fan base has moved to Blue Sky. So if you can get there, they're still invite only. And I don't have invites because I've not been there long enough. It's a merit-based system, and I have no merits.
I'm on Threads.
I was gonna say I'm still looking into Threads and wondering if I need to dive into that. But
I'm also trying to pull back from all the different social media.
yeah, there's only so
much.
many. Yeah,
Too
definitely
many.
is.
So, and you can join our Patreon through AIPT Comics. Join us on Discord. You can leave us a 5-star review in all your favorite and non-favorite podcasting platforms. And with that, we will see you again next week. The plan right now, so that everybody has time to do it, is we're reading Inquisitor, Rise of the Red Blade by Delilah Dawson. And so that is our plan, is to discuss that next week. So if you want to join us for that discussion, it will be a spoiler-filled discussion. So if you want to read ahead, that would be great. And we'll see you then.